and welcome to Friday Art with me, Cate Field. Now, in today's lesson, we're just going to be using white, which could be a little bit boring, but it's not. It's going to be wonderful. We are going to add little bits of colour in as well, but sometimes doing white on white and painting white things can be a little bit daunting. Anyway, welcome if you are new. My name is Cate Field. I'm an artist, teacher, writer and speaker, and I am passionate about helping people find their creative spirit, and once they've found it, to develop it a little bit more. Welcome back to those of you who have been with me for months and months, and thank you for your wonderful comments. Oh my goodness, what a fabulous community this is. Anyway, white on white, and we're going to be using acrylic paint and maybe something else, and I may add a tiny bit of one colour right at the end. Who can guess what that's going to be? Let's go. So I'm going to be using some acrylic paint and some watercolour paint. This is very inexpensive. I'm using a lot of white, a little bit of grey or silver, and a little bit of this buff titanium, which I really like. I'm not going to use black at all. I might use a little bit of brown. We'll see how we go. I'm going to be working in my sketchbook. You need to have paper that has a little bit of substance to it. This is my 300 gram paper. That's why I did all my other doodles and things in. But we're going to go straight in. And I'm going to be using some very sophisticated toilet rolls as well, and a sponge and some soft brushes. The whole point of this white on white, very pale use of colours is to really get you to explore texture and shape without getting bogged down with what colour I'm going to use and all of that kind of stuff. And as always, we need to start off by just playing with the materials that we have. So this is going to be quite an interesting video because I'm not really sure how it's going to come out on film, but we will just see. I'm starting off by putting in a square block of white. I'm going to just pick up the buff here, and we're just going to start to blend. Now, if you are new to using acrylics, this is such a good exercise to do, to practice your blending skills. There are lots of different ways to blend using acrylic paint, and it's going to be dependent on what you want. Whether you want kind of a very gradual gradient move from one colour to the next or one tone to the next, or whether you want something that's a bit more obvious and deliberate. But you can just have a little bit of a play with that. So again, I'm going to do another block here. I'm just going to do squares and rectangles. I'm going to put the white down first. I'm not using any water. I'm going to just using straight in with acrylic. I'm just going to put in a bit of grey. This is kind of like a silver grey. And I'm just putting in some marks, seeing what marks the brush comes up with, and then just putting the paint onto the paper. It's just, again, that's why I say to my students all the time, you just need to start, just put a mark on the paper. I think we can be afraid, especially if we're using a new sketchbook. So I'm releasing this in the middle of January. So you might be working in a new sketchbook, and that can be a little bit daunting, I think. Allow yourself to play. So I'll just popping in that bit like that. Again, these aren't anything in particular. We're just putting down the white. And just doing blocks. I'm not sure how well this is going to come out, but again, this is a bit of an experiment. Now I'm just going to pop that grey on, and then I'm going to go in with my sponge. Now this is a soft stenciling sponge and a makeup brush, actually. Makeup brushes work really well, but they do create some really lovely textures. I'm just going to rub that in like that. Very, very, very subtle. It's going to pop in a bit more there with the brush. Making it so you can dab to make the different marks. And then you can go back in with your brush. Now with acrylic you do need to work quickly if you're just using acrylic, because it dries very fast. Now I'm going to use my brush, just see how that edge softens. That's quite interesting, isn't it? So I'm just sort of picking up these ideas. I'm going to do similar stuff on this page, and then I'm going to show you how you can use watercolours and acrylics mixed together. So on this one I'm just going to use a decorator's paintbrush, because I just want to put in the white quickly. Again, it's going to be important to put this onto the page quickly, because I don't want it to dry before I do the next bit. Putting that on there, all across the whole page. Again, it's not great, is it, to see this? I'm actually going to make myself laugh now. Bit of paint onto the toilet roll. Just going to make these circles. They'll go a bit lumpy, that's fine. Like that. And then I'm going to go in with my brush, and where that's a bit too much there, and I'm going to shade in some of these circles. I get like this. Again, just sort of playing around with the paint. I'm not worrying too much about what it looks like at the moment, and I am just enjoying the process. That's what I talk about all the time. Just putting that paint on to the page, just making that starting point like that, and go back in with the toilet roll and just sort of go into what I've done already. You can see that you can make additional marks because the paint is still wet. Just go a little bit crazy on that, but that's going to be quite an interesting piece. I am going to leave that to dry. I'm just going to go over now back onto this page, which is, it is drying, it's not completely dry yet, and then we're going to do something else with that one. So this is where I'm going to use one of those what if moments that it's one of my favourite phrases when students say this to me. What if I do this? Oh, no idea. Let's try it out and see. And I'm using a thinner brush, and I'm going to go in with my watercolours. I'm going to pick up a blue. And I just want you to see what happens when we start to combine. Remember that this acrylic paint is still wet. When we start to put in some watercolour, I'm just going to take a little bit of water off there. And I think that there's too many people who are afraid of combining the media, and I just say, oh, let's go for it, let's see what happens. So this is just one line of the watercolour. I will put all the materials that I use in the description. So I'm just putting in this blue. I am going to knock it back because it's too blue, but I wanted to show you what happens when you combine them, because I think it works really well. Just doing a little bit of scraping that out. The brush is damp, so there's a little bit of water on there, not too much. Just going to fade that out like that. And now I'm going to use my sponge just to do those edges there, like that. It's going to create a different sort of texture. And again, when we're doing abstracts, it really does give us the opportunity to try out things, because we're not trying to make it look like something. And this is one of the biggest problems, I think, when we are learning and trying out new things, is that we have this expectation that something has got to look like something. Whereas abstract can just be your feelings, your emotions, or it can just be you trying out a technique, just seeing what happens there. So I'm just putting in, again, this is the watercolour. Just going to pop in that little circle there. Once the watercolour dries into the acrylic, then it's fixed. If it was just watercolour, even when it's dry, if I wanted to then work on top of it, the colour underneath would interact. That's not what I want. Let me just move that like this. We're going to try another colour into this one. Now this is quite dry now. I'm just putting in this Prussian blue, which is one of my favourite blues. Again, this is the watercolour on top of the acrylic. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add some white acrylic paint to the watercolour. Just kind of knock back the colour a little bit. And obviously I've got the pigment on the brush, so it's going to be spread out a little bit, like that. Again, just try some of these out. This is why it's quite nice to work in a sketchbook, because you can follow your progress, you can write notes. If you're in one of my A-level classes or my degree classes, I would be expecting you to comment, to reflect, to annotate your work in some way. But obviously, you do whatever you want. The advantage of that, of annotating your work, is, for me, and I don't annotate everything, but I do annotate some things, especially if I've tried out something new, because I refer back to my sketchbooks all the time. And when I do that, it's always quite good to know, oh, I really love that technique. What did I do? What materials did I use? What brands of paint did I use? And then I've got a reference for myself. I don't always do it, but it has been quite useful in the past, especially if I'm trying out something very new, or a new product, for example. So again, I've got this. This is still a little bit too blue. I want to bring that more into white, and I will do that in a moment. I'm going to go back to this one because this is drying. It's not completely dry. I'm going to go back into white. And I'm just going to do a bit more on here. It's still a little bit too blue. I want to kind of make this much more subtle. And again, you can do this with acrylic. So in a later tutorial, I'm doing it at the moment, I'm sort of planning it at the moment, of working with oil paints. A few people have asked me about starting in oil paints. And I'm thinking, yeah, that would be good. So I'm going to do that one. So if you haven't liked this and you've got this far, that would be really nice. Apparently the YouTube algorithm works better, and it will, if you like, then it will show my videos to other people that also might like it. So that would be good. So if you haven't liked yet, I would very much appreciate it if you did. And if this is something that you would like more of, then perhaps you'd consider subscribing. Let's just do that. Can you see that I've now kind of made this a bit more mottled? And just coming into this circle, I'm just thinking about what I'm going to do here. This brush is very wet, so I'm just going to use a rag. And I'm going to break this circle. I'm going to blend the circle into the white and see what that would be like. Because I'm thinking I want to have this more subtle. But all of these techniques you can adapt and use in your own work. And this is what I love so much about teaching art and craft and art and design, is I want to teach people techniques and skills that you can then use in your own way. You know, I don't encourage people to blindly copy what I do, because I don't feel that that is going to expand your own creative journey. And that's what I'm really interested in, passionate about, in fact. And that makes me very, very happy when students sort of take an idea of mine and then do something very different with it. Oh, it's wonderful. That is wonderful. And you see that I'm just sort of blending that in and just seeing. So this is my sketchbook, and in my sketchbook I play around with ideas which I then might develop a little bit further. So I'm going to go on to this one. This is still wet. I'm going to pick up the same Prussian blue, I think, with this buff colour. I'm just going to put in. Now you see that the acrylic paint is still wet, so it's combining. It's a little bit too wet, that one. Let's get some of this off. And the thing with your sketchbook is it is really a place to try things. And so that's, yeah, it's not looking great, but I do like the combination of the colours. So I'm thinking that what if I was to just pick up this sort of movement here and see what happens with that. And again, it's just an experiment, and it might work and it might not. I also really encourage you to embrace your mistakes. Mistakes being in inverted commas. I'm just going to break down that a little bit. I'm not sure about that. I don't think that works terribly well. Let's fade it in to another bit up here. More of a sort of an abstract. Yeah, I'm liking that more as a background actually. So I've got these circles. I now want to put in some lines. And there's various ways that you can add lines. I'm going to show you one using a bit of cardboard. Let's just break up this first of all. So I'm now going to use a bit of cardboard, just ordinary cardboard packaging that's corrugated, which gives an interesting edge. I'm just going to tear it a little bit. I'm going to use this to make the marks. I'm going to pick up some of this grey. Just make it very, very messy. Just going to perhaps just put it onto the edge like that. And now I'm just going to make marks on to this page here. Again, just sort of breaking up some of the space. And I'm just going to break that up a little bit more. You see, you can start to get some very interesting textures. While that is still wet, I'm going to go in with my sponge. Just going to get most of that grey off. I'm going to pick up the white. And it's going to take here, it's going to knock back some of the grey. It's just a bit too much. So I'm hoping you're beginning to get this idea that white on white and getting these very pale tones is very much about layering. And you'll see at the end a piece that I've done using this technique that is very, very pale. But the process is exactly this, building up with other colours underneath. And that is what's going to make it a bit more exciting, really. A bit more interesting, and it will add to the texture. And this is the thing with acrylics, is you can add things to it. There's various gel mediums and textured mediums that you can use to add to acrylics to give it a bit more texture. I'm not going to do it on this one. I might do it in a future tutorial. But I just wanted to build this up. Still want to have some of these circles showing underneath, but if I feel I've kind of lost them a bit, I can just add a few more in. just keep. And this is why you have to have paper that does have a little bit of substance, because you are going to be working on the paper a lot, and if it's too flimsy it will just tear, and that would be a bit frustrating. But having said that, I have used this technique on magazine paper and newspaper, you know, especially when I'm kind of teaching it to a young class who might be just a little, again, that kind of fear of working on paper that's expensive and being too scared to even try in case they make a mistake. Whereas if you're working on a bit of newspaper, then it won't matter. I think I might actually show you that. I might do that on a bit of magazine, because you might be feeling a little bit scared. You might have got some new paints or some new paper for Christmas. You're thinking, oh gosh, I don't want to waste it. So can you see what's happening now? Building up texture. It's very, very pale. I'm still using my sponge and my toilet roll. And now I'm going to use an edge of an old credit card, because that can make terrific marks. So this technique, I'm going to be using watercolour. I put some water into this tray. I'm going to pick up on that blue. So it's going to be very, very watery, which is what I want. Just putting a bit in there. And then I'm going to put my credit card in. And I'm going to start to put some marks on here. Again, I want these to be very, very subtle. And you can see the marks and the drips. When they dry, they will fade. I'm just creating a bit of texture. Now remember, when we talk about texture in art, it could actually mean the physical texture, so it could be lumpy or scratchy or soft or smooth, but it's also, texture is also used when we're talking about the illusion of texture. So it could actually be soft to touch, but it could look rough. And again, you can try things out. So again, I'm picking up just some of this very, very wet watercolour. And I am now just going to leave that to dry. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to be using my old credit card again, but this time I'm going to be using acrylic paint. I'm going to be using the buff, mainly white, tiny bit of that turquoisey blue. And what I'm going to do is to just sort of scrape across the surface. I'll do this really quickly because you're not going to be able to see very much of this. So I'm going to go in to that blue. So I've just put a little bit, and I'm just scraping so that the paint is very, very thin. Scraping it across. And then I'm going to add a bit more white on top of that so you can see it a little bit better. And this will dry really quickly because I'm not using any water at all, and I'm using the paint very thinly. Scraping it across, just using this sort of plastic card. You can see that some of the texture of the paper is coming through of this. Again, just scraping that. So it's very, very subtle, but it gives such a terrific background. And again, I'm just sort of smoothing that out. And if you use thicker paint, you can obviously make marks using the credit card or a bit of cardboard. So still keeping with the card, I'm just going to do a little bit of marks and patterns. I'm doing this with the blue. And I'm then going to go over the top with some white. So it always was going to be a bit of a challenge filming white white painting, but I thought, no, I really do want to do this, and so I have adapted this a little bit, and I am using a little bit more colour just so that you can see, because otherwise I don't think that would have been a very interesting video, would it? Here's me doing white on white on white on white. No, that was going to be a little bit too challenging. But I'm hoping that you can see by putting the colour down and then again, I'm still using this card, scraping the white over the top. I am going to leave that to dry, and then I'm going to go over with the sponge so it just gets much, much paler, because that's the effect that I want to do. And then while these are drying, I'm going to be working on a little bit on a canvas. I'm going to show you a piece that I am actually working on at the moment that's going to be shown in a exhibition later. When's it going to be? March, I think. March is... So just scraping that across there. Leave those to dry, and then I'm going to be adding more white. So this is the start of my canvas painting. It's going to be a winter landscape, but it's going to be quite abstract. And I've put down the base in exactly the same sort of technique that I've just shown you. I've put in colour, and then I've put white over the top. Again, I'm just going to be using the white, that little bit of turquoisey blue, some cobalt blue, and a little bit of that buff. I'm using a sponge, and I'll be using a soft brush as well. This is still too blue, and the paint underneath is almost dry. And you can see it's sort of picking up some of the colour underneath. And I'm just using the sponge brush just to slide over the surface. So I'm going to show you a few of the techniques that I use. I use a very soft brush. I'm going to make it damp, so I've just put it into some water, and then I'm just going to take off some of the surface water. I'm just going to pick that bit up there, and that's, oh yeah, don't want bits landing on the canvas. that's what happens sometimes. And so I'm going to be using this blue, picking up a little bit of the white like that, and I'm just going to put in this sort of idea of some rolling hills. I've kind of started it here, but I thought I would emphasize this because I thought this might be quite useful for people to see. Now I am going to use a bit of grey in this as well, and I'm painting with my brush, and so I'm just going to put in some of these lines of where I want my hills to be. Just putting them in like this, and this is the view that I can see out of my window. It's not exactly what I can see. I'm not going to put in the sheep. Not today. Although I do love looking out of my studio window and seeing the sheep. It is lovely. So I'm just putting in this idea of the rolling hills. So this is where I live in Dorset. I live in West Dorset, near the Devon border, on the south coast of England, and it is beautiful. It's a beautiful part of the world. But wherever you live, you will have somewhere fabulous. You just will, because that's our world, isn't it? Our world has beautiful places and spaces, and sometimes we just need to open our eyes. So we don't have kind of dramatic mountains or anything like that, but we do have these hills. And when the winter light falls on the hills, you have this gorgeous kind of colour of winter, and I love it. I absolutely love it. So I'm going to be adding bits to this, but I just want to show you a little bit of how I'm using a lot of white And for this base undercoat, I'm using a cheaper acrylic, and then when I do the top bit, then I will use my more expensive ones. And again, you know, think about your budget. And as I said, this one is going to be shown in an exhibition locally, and so I am going to be using good quality paints. So I'm just putting in this white with the brush, and in a moment I'm just going to show you how I do a bit of blending. So let's just pop that white in like that. Now I'm going to go back in with my brush, which I've just got very mucky. So that I've got different sizes of these sponges, and I like the effects that you can get. This is my larger one. Just putting in those lines, blending that in just a tiny bit. So it's really quite subtle, and it's actually hugely enjoyable doing this as well. So I want to have a smooth finish on this particular bit. I'm going to have more texture further down the canvas, but this first bit I just want to have smooth, and this is where the sponge can be very helpful. And again, it's about learning a technique and then seeing what you can do with it. I'm just going to add this little bit of blue now, like that. Again, just bringing in those colours. So this won't be finished for this tutorial because it will take time to build up various layers, but over the next few weeks, if you're interested, I will show you the progress. I'll probably put it onto the Facebook group as well. If you haven't joined the Facebook group yet and you think that might be something you'd like to do, you'll be very, very welcome. So it's very friendly. What a friendly, supportive place. The link is in the description. Please answer the questions and agree to the group rules. I've had a few people who've tried to join, and I haven't been able to accept you because you haven't agreed to the group rules. And we need to do that, sadly, because there are unsavoury people, shall we say, who are trying to get into our spaces. So I just need to make sure that you are real. So I will ask you a silly question and ask you to agree to the group rules. But oh my goodness, I have been overwhelmed with the love and the support in this group. So there are people in the group who've only just started their creative journey. There are people who are sort of experienced. There are people who are trying new things for the first time, and it's just lovely. So you can see I'm sort of building up this kind of smooth landscape, little bit by little bit. I just wanted to show you that technique, and then we're going to go back to the sketchbooks. So I've come back to my sketchbook. This is all very, very dry. And what I want to do now is to show you how I kind of work out techniques. So as you can see, this is where all that texture is. That blue is the watercolour. And then what I'm going to do now is to use my sponge and put some white. And I'm just going to put some white over the top of part of this, so I can gauge and see how much I need to do to knock back. And you see the contrast now, so it's going to do a little bit more. Now with acrylic, you know, you can cover just about everything. So if I wanted to just make the whole thing white again, I could do that, but that would just be a bit silly, wouldn't it? What I want is this subtle, and I'll keep this as it is so you can see the contrast between the two sides as I just sort of build up using very thin acrylic, just so that I can get that. It makes it very, very subtle. You see the difference between that bit down there? And this is where things get very exciting, and I do love this technique. I just think it's very interesting. I really like it. Right, I'm going to leave that so I can see the contrast between this side and this side. Let's just go over to this bit again. This, I do actually quite like that, but I just want to show you, if we want to just sort of break that up a bit, I'll just do the bit at the bottom, and then again you can see the contrast. You see that? And that's when things do start to get quite interesting. Just sort of picking up. Remember that blue was the watercolour. So just putting that bit, and yeah, you could also use a brush, very soft brush. You'll get the same sort of effect. And this is where things just start to get just a bit more interesting, I think. And again, I'll leave that because it just shows me what I need to do, how I can kind of break down that idea. So I'm going to leave that one to dry. Probably just leave that now, perhaps do a little bit of annotation on it. Just going to turn the page carefully, and then I'm going to do something similar on this side. I'll just leave that kind of loose because the page before it is still wet, and I'm going to do the same here. Just going to take my white and put the white over the top, just to see what happens. And with this, I quite like this cream, so I'm going to add a bit of the buff to that. And the other colour that I'm going to add to this, which will be the last colour that I use, is going to be purple. And I'm going to use purple watercolour. I'm just going to activate it by giving it a bit of a squirt. I'm going to use the same sponge, which has already got white on it. Just going to dab it into the watercolour palette, which I will then clean. And I'm just going to put a few dabs of the purple, and then going to just wipe the sponge, and then I'm just going to start to blend like this. And it's the purple, when I go back to my sort of abstract landscape, I will use the purple to create the shadows. You see that effect there. And now I'm going to add some more white, just to sort of break that so it's a little bit too purple. There we go. And this sort of technique is lovely if you want to do like subtle skies, or like a sunset or a sunrise, that kind of thing. It works really, really well. And again, I love this technique, and I would encourage you to just sort of practice and play with the technique and then do your own thing. So that is going to be the last bit of my experiment. So we've got these bits as well, and I'll just show you one more bit on the canvas. So I'm back onto the canvas, and I'm just moving that little hair. I'm going to go into that purple that's still wet, because what I want to do is to have this idea of sort of the purple purple hills. It's just, you can see that's very dark purple, which I don't want, but that's, just putting that on there. I'm just going to get my cloth, take that off, go back to my white, and then I'm going to start to blend. And I find that the advantage of using just a bit of watercolour paint rather than purple acrylic is you can keep it really thin, sliding that over like that. I'm just going to use a slightly smaller brush with white. There we go. Being very careful not to put my sponge in my coffee, which is by the side. Oh dear, how many times have I done that? Right, I am going to show you what I do here. So I've got a bit of a lump there. I'm just going to pick that up with my little pointy thing, right, just to move that. That will happen, things get stuck. You just need to move them. Again, it's like little hairs, there's a little hair there, I'll pick that one up in a moment as well. I'm using very little water, so it will dry quickly. Just softening that edge. So the blue is beginning to come through. I like that. Let's just do this a little bit up here. I'd love to know what you think. I'd love to know what you're going to do. I hope I've inspired you to have a play and to try this technique if you have never tried it before. Let me know in the comments. Give me a weather update. I always like a weather update from around the world. It's just lovely. There we go. If you haven't liked yet, and you've got this far, then that would be nice. Apparently makes a huge difference to the algorithm. If you like my videos and my tutorials, then YouTube then suggests it to other people who also might like it. So that kind of helps me to grow my little channel. So yeah, so you can see that. Again, it's still too purple for me, so I am going to be knocking it back a little bit more. But I'm going to leave that as it is for the moment.
I really hope you enjoyed that. I love it. I just love playing, as you probably have guessed. And if you think that you want to do some more, then you need to look at this one and this one. And I'll see you next time. Bye bye.